turn our blockchain into a multi-core computer, a multi-core supercomputer. Instead of us having just a single core, we could have multiple cores. All the kinds of flexibility that we haven't really seen in the last generation of blockchain and that we've been able to provide with polkadot. On some chains, you can mint millions of NFTs for just a cent. If it's possible to add millions of NFTs onto a system and it only costs an end user 1 cent to do so, is this actually scalable? What happens when people actually figure this out, attack the network with $1 and make 100 million NFTs? Will their blockchain actually scale? All these meme coins and NFT drops and bullshit that won't actually have any meaningful impact on the history of the chain. Hundreds of years, these chains will have some random NFT drop about some kitties or zombies, and this is gonna hurt the scalability of that chain. Us being able to parallelize and shard all the data. If you were to do millions and millions and millions of NFT drops into the asset hub, the impact on Polkadot is a single hash. It doesn't matter how much data is there, so that Polkadot is always scalable and sustainable.
All right, I'm bullish now. You got me. That was good. All right, thank you for tuning into another episode of the Teach Me DeFi podcast. Today is going to be super interesting because we're going to be chatting about building a decentralized supercomputer, or even a world computer. And we got the perfect guest for it here. We got Shawn Tabrizi here with us. Real quick, if you enjoy the episode, I'll just say beforehand, if you learned something, please consider to follow and subscribe and share this episode. It really helps us out a lot. All right. Thank you for being here, Shawn.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, lovely. I mean, before we dive into sort of like the supercomputer business, before things can get technical, how do you like describe your job if someone outside of crypto asks you?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it depends on whether or not I want to let them know that directly I'm working on blockchain or crypto. You know, it depends on who you talk to, what their feeling about the space is. But in general, I'm an engineer. I love to tinker. I love to learn. And I'm interested in building technology that will change the world. So that's kind of how I would start.
Right. Okay. That's pretty on point. And what's your story? How did you end up doing this, working on Polkadot? I guess from the start, right? But also like before that, and how did you end up here?
Yeah, and honestly, me ending up here has been pretty lucky. I think just being interested in the right kinds of things and kind of stumbling into the right stuff. Actually, I studied physics and math in school, so I really don't have any formal computer science background. But I realized in university that getting a physics PhD wasn't for me. So luckily, I was able to get a job at Microsoft right out of university. I was there for 4 years, and it was during my time at Microsoft that I learned about Ethereum through, I think, a bachelor party. Someone was wearing a shirt that was Augur. I don't know if you're familiar with Augur. It's more like the OG prediction network stuff on Ethereum.
No, I don't know. Yeah.
Check it out. They're very cool. But he kind of explained to me, this platform, and then explained to me it was all built on this thing called Ethereum. And I had heard about Bitcoin when I was doing research in university because I was actually doing CUDA, like GPU accelerated programming, and obviously one of the big uses of GPUs back in the day was to mine Bitcoin.
Right.
Yeah, so I really investigated or learned more about the topic. I think Bitcoin at the time, it being a university, you're broke, you don't really understand the concept of money or whatever. It didn't really resonate with me, like this idea of internet money. But being at Microsoft and learning about this, internet computer, this kind of world computer, right? That originally was the idea around Ethereum, that very much resonated with me. And so I quickly learned about Ethereum. I built my first Solidity smart contract, started publishing stuff, answering questions on the Stacks Exchange. And I kind of get to the point where I was so excited to work on Ethereum. I was leaving work early just to do side projects. And I think that's a pretty good indicator that probably I should go get a proper job in this space. So I quit Microsoft. I joined Parity. And I joined Parity because they were working on, really I joined because of Ethereum. I had really not known anything about Polkadot at the time. And Polkadot really wasn't, I think, super big either. But I had wanted to join Parity because they had built the fastest Ethereum client, built in Rust. It was the thing that kept the network running during the various Shanghai attacks and stuff. So they definitely had a huge reputation in their name. And I wanted to be, working on core engineering, level blockchain protocol stuff, not, dApps or whatever. And so Parity was a perfect spot. I joined them, and I think I was in the hiring wave for them building this, new technology stack, Polkadot and Substrate. And so kind of in my final interview with Gav, he kind of mentioned, hey, would you be interested in working on something kind of new instead of Ethereum? And I said yes. And I think that was just the kind of the lucky break for me. And I've been working on Polkadot and Substrate for about 5 years now. And it's been awesome. I've learned so much, and I've hopefully helped contribute a lot as well.
Wow. So pretty much from the start, in terms of Polkadot, you were involved. That must have been It must have been a unique challenge, right? You've seen like all stages of growth, so to say, for a major blockchain ecosystem.
Yeah, and I mean, from technical side to even the just like launching a token, all that stuff, it's a pretty unique experience. And it was also, pretty amazing to be in a spot where, we had really, really intelligent people who had experience, doing things like, Gav had already, launched the ETH token, right? And been able to do that successfully. And, us navigating, the murky waters of the SEC, and even just again going down to technology side, just like building a whole new protocol stack, right? I mean, I thought I known a lot about Ethereum, and blockchain, but really how little is not clear until you actually deeply try to learn this stuff. So yeah, it's been super exciting and super lucky for me to be in that spot.
Right. I mean, even you just mentioned it, like from a regulatory point of view, as far as I know, you guys have been quite diligent on that front as well. You mentioned the
Yeah.
SEC, because one of
Mm-hmm.
the recent narratives was that the dot coin is software, right?
Yes.
And there was a very conscious process behind like how you launched the coin and how you kind of morphed it into that. I know
Mm-hmm.
that's not your main area, but do you want to speak to that a bit as well?
Sure. Again, the fact that I'm not a lawyer and I wasn't directly on this SEC team, I definitely know a lot of behind the scenes kind of what the idea was and what was trying to happen. When you're launching any kind of token, or any kind of product to the world, right? You have to think about, which, actors are in play and which, countries have influence. And if we talk about, very powerful influence, I think the US is definitely one of those countries that, no matter what you do, if you're trying to launch something for the world, you have to kind of follow the US regulatory policy, right? Because the US seems to have a pretty, I want to say negative, but I don't think that they've been so friendly to really paint clear lines as to what you should do with launching tokens, etc. One of the philosophies of Polkadot was actually just to stay away from the U.S. market as much as not as much as possible, but like just make sure that all token sales, you couldn't be a U.S. persons. We didn't know, explicit marketing or kind of advertising to the U.S. market, all that kind of stuff, right? And these are all really important things to ensure that, if you're not registered as a security, these things are not allowed. And I think many tokens, the ones that are still kind of going through these different lawsuits, they didn't follow these rules. They very much treated their token as some kind of product being sold to individuals, and they didn't register as a security to the SEC. So these are all kind of like no practices, and we wanted to make sure, really to ensure that Polkadot would be a token that could launch safely, that could be something that the right markets could access, and that we had the opportunity to actually transition into a decentralized, software. By being ensuring that we're no longer a security, and then give ourselves 100% accessible to the world. I think that's all the kinds of things we were planning from the very beginning. One of the ways I think we did this is that we had some really, really smart, intelligent people from Web3 Foundation, and various lawyers and people who are very familiar with the space talk to people in the U.S. regulatory scene and kind of figure out, okay, well, what are the plans? What can we do? And we also gave them a lot of insight that we have from the technical side. What is possible to be done? What can actually what actually would work, doesn't work, and through that, actually, we've had, I think a lot of great success. Unfortunately, you can't necessarily, when laws come out of the U.S., they don't say, oh, this was thanks to, blank, product, whatever. But if you look at, the way what we have been describing with Polkadot in terms of transitioning from a security to software, right? Having a point where something can be launched by kind of a centralized company, can have some promises backed by it. That's all the things that kind of against, what you would qualify as security, but then transition to something that's completely decentralized, completely owned by token holders, completely managed by, the public, which would be quite decentralized and actually be software. That pathway actually, I think, just got pushed into a law. I can't remember. I think it's something like something 51. But I mean, basically exactly what we were looking for, and exactly what we were pushing forward as this is the right way to move forward. The SEC and the US seem to have adopted. So I think that we had a really great influence into that. And yeah, I think now we can feel very confident, the fact that we have no pseudo keys, we have no multi-sig, that OpenGov is running, and the Polkadot network's entirely run by the dot holders, like that we very much are a software, not a security. And I think because of that, we are going to survive not only the regulatory scrutiny, but also just the long-term lifespan of these kinds of networks compared to others.
Right. Right. That's a lot of milestones that you guys have hit already. And speaking about lifespan, there's a lot to come. That's milestones towards building this decentralized supercomputer, right?
Yeah.
So I had seen this one presentation of yours where you kind of like spoke about like the decisions around building these systems, and obviously decisions are the thing that drive a project towards any goal. So and also in crypto, you have this kind of thing where everyone's project is the best, right? You spoke about
Mm-hmm.
that too. So just understanding like the design decisions and trade-offs can be valuable, I think, for viewers,
Of course.
so that people can kind of like leave this interview with maybe mental models or some understanding to be able to place these grandiose promises and statements that they hear the next time they hear from shiny project XYZ say them,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, how about we dive into that sort of thing?
Sure. I mean, I would say to start off,
Yeah.
one of the big fundamental philosophies that we've always had in Polkadot is that, there isn't one blockchain to solve all problems. That we very much believe in a multi-chain future.
Yeah.
And that multi-chain future was at some point very involving of the fact that, Polkadot could support multiple parachains and, give them all the capabilities of security, interoperability, scalability, etc. But, I think the multi-chain future also is a belief that, that other kinds of decisions and other kinds of trade-offs will exist and will be attractive to different kinds of people, right? For example, if I'm trying to run a certain software which is transferring billions of dollars of value, that kind of technology stack is going to be different than I'm going to try to be running a gaming chain with high TPS, low latency, right? You can't have one blockchain really satisfy both of those things really well, right? And I don't think that's the expectation that we're going to be able to do that. I think that there will be many different blockchains with different trade-offs. And I think it's really important when we go out there, one, to not believe in this maximalist viewpoint. Don't believe in, this is one chain and all the others are done, right? But also to understand the trade-offs they're making, right? We all, I think one of the big things I would want to push is that we all live in the same physical world, right? There isn't one team that's achieving 1000x performance just because their programmers are better. That's just not how code works. All of our programmers across all these different teams are quite good. We all use the same networking stuff. We all have the same servers, same hardware. This kinds of different trade-offs in performance, whatever, is part of that triangle, right? The triangle between decentralization, scalability, and security, right? So this is kind of the thing where, you getting a big boost in one probably leads or means that there's a trade-off or some kind of decision made in the other path. So I think, when talking about Polkadot, talking about other protocols, it's really important to talk about decisions, not talk about like random metrics like TPS, which really don't mean anything. It can be gamed, right?
Well, tell me more about that, because I don't think that's very intuitive to people who are non-technical. I think TPS is still being discussed a lot in the space. So
sure.
Why is that not the be all, know it all and be it all? Is that even a saying? I don't know. Yeah, tell me about it.
TPS. I mean, I think it's really easy to break down TPS. First, there's a saying and a law which basically says as soon as you have a metric which is measured, that metric becomes flawed, because you can always gain measurements, right? You can always adjust, your protocol or your tests to make that measurement look really good. Right. So I think back in the day when we were talking about what TPS really meant, we were talking about, things like Bitcoin, where Bitcoin was kind of the only blockchain out there. There were a bunch of iterations on Bitcoin trying to adjust things like, the block size or the time of the blocks or the mining complexity. And, all of that would, ultimately lead down to like, okay, well, this one transaction you can do on Bitcoin, which is like transfer the Bitcoin token. How many of those can we do inside of, a block or inside of a period of time, right? That kind of made sense. Now, as soon as you launched Ethereum, this no longer made any sense. Now, you could have, again, comparing on Ethereum, how many balance transfers per second you could do on Ethereum versus Bitcoin, right? But, calling a smart contract versus doing a balance transfer, and even calling different kinds of smart contracts, one that just, does a simple hello world, one that does a DEX swap, flash loan, liquidity pool thing, etc. These are completely different, right? So, talking about transaction per second really makes no sense when a transaction can really lead to completely different or, varying sizes of complexity, right? So that's the first piece, right? So I think if we want to talk about TPS, we have to create some kind of general metric. And I think we can. I think that with TPS, we can have things like where we say, basically, we're trying to measure a balance transfer between two accounts, one account which already has a balance, one account which has no balance. And, we're assuming that, how do you say, that these accounts aren't cached in any way, right? So there isn't some kind of like, optimistic optimization. And that all transfers are happening between different accounts. So we can't assume like it's the same account going back and forth, right? Like, you can imagine how, again, with just those kinds of basic, tricks, you can make your TPS look super high, right? If you do this optimistic parallelization, or if you have, caching of these accounts in your memory, all that kind of stuff, you can make it super fast. But, if you want an actual metric, between two different blockchains, you need to have much more specific guarantees. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to see why TPS at a high level is just kind of a weird metric. It's just something that doesn't really make sense in the modern day. We're trying to build world computers. So, it doesn't really make sense to say like, every operation is equal. So I think the more common terminology we have nowadays is things like block space. And block space is a measurement of different things, a measurement of kind of like how much, memory is available, how much computation is available. That's kind of going down to the ops level, right? But also the quality of that block space, right? So another thing to measure here is that, you could have a blockchain with really high TPS, really high throughput, let's just say, a lot of computational throughput. But the quality of the security of that blockchain, how long it takes to finalize it, how long it takes to create that block, all that can change too, right? And that's all really important. So like, for example, if I can have in a single block 1 million transactions because I did some kind of ZK rollup, that sounds great. But how long does it take to create that ZK rollup, right? How centralized is that ZK rollup creating process, right? Can it be censored? Can it be? There's just, you're really unpacking a lot of things. I think this idea of block space is kind of a better way to look at the measurement, but the units of measurement are multidimensional, and I mean, practically speaking, not well defined nowadays. So again, I would push your audience back from just trying to accept any one number as a clear sign of this is what is good. This is the number I'm looking for, and really try to look more deeply into, what are the guarantees about the system being used, or, what kinds of things are actually accomplishable, right?
Right. But that can be quite tricky. I'm just trying to think about how someone that's non-technical could make these sort of considerations. Then you said it yourself. It's multidimensional, and there's not one metric that rules them all. So is it still like pretty like a complex topic? It's not like industry-wide definitions of, okay, this is how we'll compare the blockchains with each other. Do you think there'll be a time where it will be more straightforward and commonly accepted what metrics matter?
Well, I'll say this. I don't think today we're in a spot where we have, very simple, kind of, or like unified forms of measurement. I think this is a lot purposeful because a lot of teams want, to control the narrative around how to measure their own blockchain, right? And one unified thing may make some blockchains not good or whatever. And also, and as I mentioned, we believe in a world of many blockchains. Like, I believe in a world of many blockchains. I believe that there is not one metric to optimize for. I don't think there should be one uniform way to measure a blockchain. I think we should be looking for different kinds of applications and what they need, right? And so if we go back to like, the philosophies of what we're even trying to do in this blockchain space, what are we trying to do in Web3? I think, thinking about, what the product is even there for to begin with, right? These tokens, what do they actually solve? What are the problems? That's the best way to approach it from a non-technical standpoint.
So maybe about that, a quote of yours is, systems of trust are easily taken advantage of, and we as individuals are left holding the bags. So what do you mean by that? Because I think that speaks to sort of like the core philosophies around this.
Exactly. I mean, let's be honest. Like, if there were no problems with trust in the world, we would not need blockchain. We would just use centralized computers. Like, imagine there's like a movie where everyone has to tell the truth. Imagine there's just some world where everyone has to tell the truth. Every computer has to tell the truth. There's no lying involved. There's no deceit. We wouldn't need blockchain because, you could have a central party do everything and trust that, that will always be correct and that will always be right. But that's not the world we live in. We live in a world where, in fact, just as I said, where there was trust in the world, people take advantage of it, and they take advantage of it to make themselves more powerful, and to leave us little guys holding the bag, make us, I guess like, just they do it, they gain at our cost, right? And if we go back to, again, the initial blockchain out there, Bitcoin, right? Included in the Bitcoin Genesis hash is that newspaper by the Wall Street Journal that we bailed out more banks, right? This was all kind of Bitcoin was very much a was created as a result of the catalyst of the Wall Street crash and the big 2008 financial crash, which was again all reliant on a bunch of central actors, having taken advantage of the system, lied about the quality of certain securities and all these other things, and basically they made billions of dollars. They crashed the whole world market, and basically the governments bailed them out, leaving us, the individuals who pay taxes, holding the bag. Right? That is the fundamental problem we're trying to solve. Can we create systems which can do better? Can we create systems which do not rely on trust, where we as individuals can verify these situations, where no individual party has the ability to say, we're going to bail out this person, right? It's very much in the control of us as individuals, right? And the answer is yes. The answer is with blockchain, we can do that. And it took us a long time and we're still building, that technology to get there. But with Bitcoin, we first showed, okay, well, we can manage a basic ledger, which keeps track of how much balance people have, right? Then with Ethereum, we can, iterate on that idea and, create, these general software like Turing complete contracts that we can actually run and do more stuff. And now we're in the phase of scaling it out. Like, can we take that idea of building this general world computer and actually have it scale to 8 billion people or more, right? But I think that's the starting point. The starting point comes with, if you don't believe fundamentally in the idea that we need a technology stack which is not reliant on trust, then this might not be the right space for you. Like, this is very much the space about building those things. And when you come to that realization that, what are the attack scenarios, right? Like, what are the attack scenarios for existing blockchains? If you believe this blockchain that you're, invested in is super awesome, but they rely on a 3 out of 5 multisig, right? Are you really embodying the philosophies of, less trust, more truth, right? If you're reliant on a blockchain that has tons and tons of TPS, but they're basically reliant on 21 centralized block producers, is that again the kind of system that actually embodies the idea of Web3, right? So this is kind of the starting point. Reevaluate. What are the things that it actually takes, the decisions actually made to get to the certain points, and does it align with what we're trying to do here in the first place, right?
Right. But what if number goes up? No, just kidding.
I mean,
because
the market very much. I mean, how do I say? Like, people, how do I say? It's very easy to be exciting, especially in the TikTok era of things where everyone just has an 8-second attention span, and you just want to grab their attention and just get them to dump in. It's awesome. It's crazy to me. One of the things that really hurts my soul day to day is that people are actively investing in what is known as meme coins or shit coins. Like, isn't it crazy to think that everyone knows that this token is literally just a meme? It's literally just a fad. It's just some BS thing. It's some fork of it, and people buy into it, right? I think that underneath all this is some kind of idea of gambling. This idea of trying to make it rich super fast, and that's unfortunately very sticky to a lot of people. I think if you go down to what will actually last, what will actually survive, generations, what will actually have long-term impact, it won't be those kinds of coins. And if we look at, let's look at some of the most, again, not investor advice, I'm not a financial advisor or anything like that, but if we look at the most successful investors of all time, like Warren Buffett, etc., right? He's always talked about his principal philosophy is not, purchasing the hot new thing, but purchasing things with high quality, strong, what's it, like family or name resonance, right? And that will last a long time. And that's the tried and true method, right? You don't bet on the quick wins. You try to play the long game. I think, when we're talking about, what kind of software, what kind of technology will actually survive, we need to, again, look back at what are we actually trying to build and which technologies actually align with that, independent of what the short-term price narrative is.
Yeah, right. It is a challenge, though, to keep focusing on principles and building for the long term when things are happening in the short term at the same time. I think that's quite a noble and strong decision, so a hard decision to make. To kind of speak to what you're saying, most people are looking for the quick payoff because it's easier than building for the long term. Perhaps to tie into that, another quote of yours was, we should be pushing away from people who try to push a blockchain maximalism idea, right? So this idea of like, this blockchain is the best, the thing I'm invested in is the best. But there's also this like push and pull effect, I feel like, when it comes to the existence of these coins. and how it is on one side pushing the industry forward, just like with the incentives and stuff like that, the game theory around it, but also holding it back in a way, right? I feel like there's this sort of dilemma there. It's like, will number go up? When will the coin that I hold pump in price? Or can devs do something? These memes that are thrown around.
Yeah.
What do you think about that sort of relationship?
I think you highlighted one of the fundamental sad things about blockchain. One thing that's amazing is that we created a system which really through cryptocurrency and through on-chain governance of that, we can actually create these unstoppable systems, these resilient systems where people can get paid for contributing back to these technology stacks, not just through donation, but through the blockchain itself, right? And also the blockchain's value can increase as people find it more valuable. That's all super exciting. That's all kind of the right kind of things we want to see in a space. What's sad is though is there's fundamentally this maximalist approach for anyone who owns any token, right? Let's say that you got into the blockchain space, you own ETH, right? And as soon as you have ETH, you are now in some ways an ETH maximalist, because every other chain that is trying to do better than ETH, which actually scales better than ETH, which actually performs better than ETH, is now a chain that will hurt you and your ETH holdings, right?
Yeah.
And your kind of objective, if you want to be strictly trying to maximize your profits or maximize your holdings, is not to let those other chains succeed, but is to flame them, is to bring them down, is to either say lies about them or even steal their software, right, and put it into your own code so that your token goes up and not some other token, right? And this is really sad because we might in this exact game theory cause ourselves to never evolve, never to actually go into the future, right? Never actually look at new software or accept new software rather than the incumbents, right? And I think we're seeing that. One of the big turning points, I think, of our blockchain space will be the flippening, right? Which is at some point, I think there's a general belief that maybe ETH might flip Bitcoin, because ETH is truthfully a much more what is it called? Useful platform for Web3 than Bitcoin is, but it's never happened yet, right? So Bitcoin being the original platform, and everyone kind of aping into it, is kind of this idea that why would they want anything else to succeed? Why should we create these world computers when we already have this basically a Bitcoin computer that's going to only do transfers, right? Is there really a purpose for anything else? I think the answer is definitely yes. I think that we as individuals should try to separate what is actually good for the world for what is actually good for our pockets, right? Now, how to do that, I don't know. I would love to see in some future, collaborative multi-token world to have ways to invest in token. It's like the like a S&P 500, right? A kind of pool of assets across all the different top blockchains out there, so that individuals don't feel like, oh, when ETH goes down because some other token came out, that they're losing, but actually they're gaining, because ideally their overall bag holdings will go up more than any individual go down. And then also the realization that that this isn't a zero-sum game. It's not that one chain succeeding means another chain fails. As long as other chains are bringing in unique value propositions, I think that it'll 100% be a net win for everyone. So, but it's hard. I think this is a very tricky balance.
Yeah, I agree. It's very tricky. And what you just said, did you mean sort of having different tokens in a pool that then that pool provides crypto economic security to networks? Is that what you meant?
Not necessarily in the context of security. I think if we can create good decentralized token pools, we can do a lot with those pools, right? One could be using them to provide security. Right. What I mean more is as a vehicle for investment, right? As individuals, again, you might say, okay, which token am I going to buy? Wouldn't it be much better to say oh, I would like to buy the a pool of the top tokens, which is automatically being managed by some some other maybe some kind of on-chain DAO, right? That would be great. And then you wouldn't feel, for example, a maximalist viewpoint on any one chain succeeding, but in fact, you just be, betting on the overall success of Web3, right? And that's kind of what I want to push. Yeah.
Right. Sort of like a crypto index ETF or things like that. Or, for example, DAOs like Polkadot, with Polkadot's decentralized treasury, perhaps holding different kinds of tokens.
Exactly. I mean, that's a big one. So I think that, we have already implemented all the functionality for our treasury, which is managed by the largest DAO in the world, to hold tokens from multiple assets. We have already USDC, USDT, and DOT. And also, we'd be happy to bring in, I'm sure, other tokens as well, and use that as a way to not only keep our treasury well funded, but also keep it well funded in the situation of market downturn or upturn, right? And also be able to pay people in assets that they want to get paid in. Yeah, right. But it would be awesome, for example,
that's a big one too.
Yeah, it would be awesome, for example, then to be able to own a portion of the treasury, right? So own a portion of these mixed assets rather than just, again, having to own only one kind of asset.
Yeah, I agree. Hey there, just a quick message. If you're watching this and you're enjoying it, please make sure to tell a friend that might also like it, because we don't run any ads on this podcast and that helps us out a lot to keep doing this. Thank you. Let's talk about kind of building this supercomputer. First of all, what is it? What is a decentralized supercomputer? And what decisions is Polkadot making now to sort of build this?
Sure. So I think it goes in this, for starting at the most non-technical perspective, we have to first have a belief that people want to launch Web3 applications, right? And again, going back to what is Web3? Web3 is the whole concept of having things be, have less trust, more truth. Having things be verifiable, having things use primitives like cryptography, economics, game theory, rather than trust, right? And relying on central actors, right? So first, we need to have a belief that there are a need for applications and software to use a stack which relies on those kind of Web3 principles rather than the Web2 principles, right? And I think that it's pretty obvious. I think that with how much boom there is in blockchain, with all the different ideas about what we can build with blockchain, whether it be decentralized identity, proof of personhood, even things like universal basic income, to prediction markets, to whatever you can imagine, right? Millions of things. These are all things that we currently rely on centralized actors, and we absolutely could bring to a Web3 space, right? And finance, even being one I don't even mention because it's so obvious now. It's so obvious how well it's working, right? That's the first point. Now that if you have a general belief that we need some Web3 applications, right? We need to figure out, okay, well, how do people actually launch them, right? Well, back in the day, before Ethereum, the way to launch a new Web3 application was to launch a brand new blockchain, right? That was the initial forks of Bitcoin. So you had like Namecoin, you had various kinds of different Bitcoin protocols, stuff like that were all just basically relaunching the Bitcoin network, right? Having to re-find a bunch of miners, right, to run this new customized logic and run. And this isn't great for a number of reasons. One, launching a blockchain is difficult, not only technically, but also from a security standpoint, right? Like if I were to launch a new blockchain using 14 Bitcoin called like Namecoin, for example, which does some kind of name service lookup type stuff, that chain is not going to be very secure because it's not going to be backed by a lot of hash power. And as people may learn when they learn about Bitcoin, again, when we talk about Blockspace, right? Blockspace is not just about what it can provide, but actually the security behind that Blockspace. That if a Blockspace isn't secure, then it's not very valuable, because if it's easy to manipulate that network, if it's easy to do like double spend attacks or to readjust or refork the chain, that makes that network not basically have none of the properties we want in a Web3 system, right? So Ethereum, I think, was a natural step forward, saying, hey, we can, instead of you having to launch a new blockchain every time, we can actually create a VM in the blockchain itself and run it. And then you can basically just, write some code and then launch it to this shared blockchain and get all the security of Ethereum, and run your application. And this works, and this has been great. So that's the natural idea. And from the very beginning, I think, when Gav was building Ethereum, he's always thought about Ethereum as a world computer. How can people take their ideas and launch it without having to, again, rebuild security from the ground up, right? Then the question all comes about scaling it, right? Ethereum is a single core computer. There is one blockchain. There is one block, right? It has an ordered set of transactions. Now, there's lots of contracts, a lot of applications running on Ethereum, but you can only run each one at a time, per transaction, right? And, there's a lot of, fighting for space there, right? And I think, what we're looking at the current kind of arms race in blockchain is all about creating a more scalable version of this computer, right? Of this Ethereum computer. And I think Polkadot is basically the next iteration of that. It is a multi-core version of what we kind of see in Ethereum. In many ways, it has the same properties, right? Where we at Polkadot have created a network which has a bunch of strong security, right? So that we can ensure that these applications being built on Polkadot are very well secured, that anyone can launch something, even if you only have one user or you're just one developer, and get the full backing of the of a tier 1 network to secure your application. But instead of us having just a single core running these smart contracts or these applications, we can have multiple cores, and we do a lot of fancy tricks to basically turn our blockchain into a multi-core computer, a multi-core supercomputer. For Web3 applications. And we find this to be very scalable, obviously, because just like normal computers going from single core to multi-core, you are able to run multiple processes at once. And not only that, you're able to have processes which can take advantage of multiple cores or even just part of a core. So this is now going to one of the topics that's kind of more technical on the Polkadot side, but we have this thing called agile core time. But at a high level, you can imagine, I have an application that might need 3 or 4 cores at once because it's very powerful or it's really heavy. Or an application that can share a core with another application, right? So 2 different applications running on one core. These are all the kinds of flexibility that we haven't really seen in the the last generation of blockchain, and that we've been able to provide with with Polkadot. So that's kind of the idea of just building this supercomputer basically for Web3 applications.
Right. So is it sort of like I'm probably simplifying extremely here, but sort of is it all about block space, sort of? So what goes in there, how you allocate it, how applications are not fighting for the same space, like you said, like on ETH, which can drive gas fees up or whatever. Is that sort of the idea, how to and provide secure block space? Like, is that the thing that we're focusing on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the way to measure all blockchains is with Blockspace. This is a very general term. I think it's very broad. It's hard to give it one unit of measurement. But with Polkadot, our goal is to create the most flexible, the most secure, the most modular block space that we can, right? And I think that with Polkadot and with JAM, this is exactly the kinds of stuff we're trying to do.
Right. And isn't size a big thing as well? I've seen numbers floating around on X about like how many megabytes, I guess, would fit in the block, or I'm not sure if I'm phrasing this right. But can you speak about that part, and then maybe make comparisons if
I'll stay away from the numbers because I don't have numbers on top, like right in hand, especially with other protocols. But I do think, again, block space is multidimensional. There's many aspects in terms of size. So one measure of size is how much data is stored in the blockchain itself, right? And actually, in general, we want smaller number there, because the smaller our blockchain it is, the more, or like the state of our blockchain is, the easier it is for general people to run it, for people to have a node on their computer. For example, if you can have a blockchain which only has, let's say, like 1 terabyte of state, you don't need a 20 terabyte computer to run it, to host it. That means that it's more decentralized, because anyone can actually have their own node. Even if it's not producing blocks, they can have their own node at home, run it, and access to these Web3 systems in a completely trust-free way, right? Now, there's also size considerations in things like data availability. So, one of the big topics right now for scaling Ethereum and scaling a lot of blockchains is providing data availability. So data availability is basically like, it's similar to state, like to the blockchain state, but the guarantees around how long that state stays around is more limited. So like blockchain state basically is supposed to live until it's deleted, or like until basically to live forever. That's the high level idea, is that you can always reproduce it. You can always run the blocks and get the state at any point in the history of the blockchain, just using the information in the transactions of the blocks, right? But with data availability, maybe I only need some data for, let's say, 1 day or even 1 hour, right? In that case, it doesn't make sense to host it forever. It doesn't make sense to like bloat the state with this information. You might only just need it for a limited window of time. And if we think about, a lot of the social interactions for using a blockchain, they're not unlimited time windows, right? Let's say I'm doing some kind of DEX trade, right? It's not that DEX trade that happened at that one point in time, like, is some kind of perpetual contract that lives forever. That the details or the information for that trade is only relevant for the window in which that trade happened. And after that trade is finished, and after we've settled all of the trades, then basically the information on that trade can disappear, right? And this is a perfect use case for things like data availability, right? Where you might only want some limited amount of information, and or you might want some information, but only for a limited amount of time, right? And so one of the other measurements we have in the blockchain space is about how much data availability you can have, and how long you can provide it for, right? And I think Polkadot has very large numbers here, and this is definitely a case where we want bigger numbers better, right? Because there's not a long-term impact, but the more data availability we can have, the more people can actually harness and use it for basically minimizing the state of their chain.
Right. Okay. Going back to the supercomputer thing, perhaps.
Okay.
Isn't there a physical supercomputer being built as well? I thought I heard Gavin Wood is building
in the
that.
JAM space. Yeah,
you're right. Yeah, what's going on there?
Let's break it down to a few steps. So definitely, Polkadot 1.0 has been launched and is working very successfully. And Polkadot 1.0 basically showed that we can build a multi-core computer. We can build something that's general and flexible to allow for basically data sharding and execution sharding. For those execution shards to be what we call heterogeneous, which means that they can basically run different applications. And we showed that all of the basic economics and security that we can provide with our staking and with the relay chain, it all works, right? What we're looking to do, what we're iterating on now, is how can we make the protocol continually be more modular, more flexible, and provide even more block space in more modular ways, right? And this is what we're kind of trying to accomplish with JAM. And JAM is again a new brainchild of Gav, and has been kind of published in this ongoing gray paper. And we're basically trying to take all the same principles of Polkadot and evolve them to be more or less opinionated on how exactly you're going to access this block space. So in Polkadot, the way we imagined people to access block space was with parachains, right? And parachains were these like long-running applications, each on their own core executing, right? And this was not a bad initial idea. Like whenever you're designing a very complex system, you have to start with something kind of simple to implement, right? Yeah. But the core ideas of, okay, can we build that simple system with multiple cores and with a sharded execution and data? Can we actually accomplish all that? And the answer was yes. And now with JAM, we're trying to say, okay, well, can we now take away some of those assumptions that you don't have to necessarily run a parachain? You can just run services. These services can access one or more cores. These services can spin up or spin down. These services could be, running entirely using data availability, have no state at all, right? So these are all the kinds of new things we're bringing with JAM. So very much an evolution on the initial ideas, like the initial technical principles, but trying to package that in a more flexible way. Now with JAM, we are launching a bunch of stuff to be able to basically have a bunch of people build new clients for these JAM chains, I guess, is the way to say it. So people are going to be able to implement, using the gray paper, the specification for the JAM chain and be able to run it. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to test how the chain and how these clients do in a production-like environment, right? And for this, we need a supercomputer. So this goes back down to your question. So the idea here is that we have the server, which can basically emulate a full running network. So it's like 1,000 validators, lots of transfers, network propagation, etc., and use that to bottleneck or to test the throughput of this network in certain parameters. Now, obviously, this is not going to be a perfect measurement of the blockchain. For example, when everything is running on one server, you basically have zero network latency, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And in the real world, you might have a lot, but it's still going to be able to unveil a lot of the bottlenecks we might find in terms of like execution of this and scaling of the software, especially in like propagation of data, right? But I want to be clear that that we do have this like supercomputer involved in helping benchmark JAM, but definitely is not a requirement for running JAM. So one of the philosophies of Polkadot has always been that we want the network to be accessible by consumer-grade hardware. So obviously, the more powerful computer we pick for our blockchain, the more speed we can get. If we want to increase our speed by 2x, we can simply just increase the requirements of our hardware by 2x, right? But this leads to more centralization. You get to the point where if only you can access this this kind of computer from Amazon, and it costs like $20,000 a month to run, that becomes very, very limiting to who can actually access and run that kind of hardware. Whereas in the
Right.
in the Polkadot philosophy, we believe that basically we want to have the specs of a high-end modern gaming computer. So these are hardware, which again is accessible by everyone. Anyone who can build a gaming computer can go ahead and build a valid running Polkadot node, but it's still not slow enough where we're basically limiting the network. We just want something that's still kind of high throughput. And usually, again, the limiting factor in terms of blockchains nowadays is the hard drives. So actually, the speed of of like NVMe drives are kind of the limiting factor. And so one of the most expensive things in terms of building this Polkadot compatible node will be finding a high throughput, high capacity NVMe drive. But practically speaking, the entry, the barrier to entry for being a validator or building even a full node in Polkadot is very low compared to other systems. And this is in alignment with the fact that we're trying to build decentralized systems, right?
Right. So basically, we're building a centralized supercomputer to test this new, like you said, JAM specification in order to then decentralize it and have it again as a decentralized network running.
Exactly. Provide everyone the highest quality software in a decentralized manner, right? And of course, this is the thing. One of the things, the philosophies of Polkadot is less trust, more truth, not no trust, right? So it's not about eliminating centralization everywhere. Centralization is a very powerful tool to get things done fast, right? Like if I'm a software developer, and I'm trying to build software, I'm not going to wait to launch, some code to, 1,000 different people around the world and then have them run it to initial performance benchmarks. I'm going to run things locally, run things where I can, and get as much information I can before relying on decentralized parties, right? But it's important to know that, again, this is just a means to an end, right? There's no supercomputer involved in running JAM or running Polkadot. It's just a means to figuring out, where can we improve.
Right. It's basically being pragmatic about being able to present service guarantees credibly to people using these networks, like you said.
Exactly.
So let's talk about two other decisions, perhaps. So perhaps only one. Let's see what we can cover.
Sure.
One of the things on the roadmap, or maybe something that has been proposed recently, I think by co-founder Rob Habermeyer, was Plaza, right? And I think this has been a topic recently in the ecosystem, and I'm curious to talk about that because I think it ties into the idea of there's been growing pains of Polkadot in terms of like usability, adoption, and this sort of like multi-chain ecosystem at the same time makes it fragmented in some ways. I think these are maybe some of the motivations behind this project. Can you tell us a bit about it and why this is useful?
Sure. I think that this really goes back to many, like, you can't have it always. So I'll present to you two different ideas, and I'll show that they're both flawed in different ways. And this is why there's not going to be one blockchain to solve all problems. One problem in the ETH world, in order for anyone to use any application running on ETH, you needed the ETH token, right? If I was going to try to build a game on ETH and expose it to users, those users to interact with my contract need the ETH token. They need that stuff, right? Even if I have my own token, I want to provide my own access, they need to have the ETH token. Now, there are lots of tricks and lots of things that people have done to be able to basically try to bypass that, right? So there's ways that, I can pay for your transactions on your behalf. There are ways that now there's some cleverness that maybe you can be able to use dexes or whatever to swap tokens in real time and transfer my token to ETH and then use ETH to pay for the gas, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of clever tricks, but one of the frustrations that we definitely saw back in the ETH only world was, man, it sucks that everything I want to do requires the use of ETH, right? I would love to be able to create my own platform and use my own token, and that was one of the reasons why some people actually built their own blockchain off of ETH, because they wanted to be able to manage their own finances, their own economics, right? All right, now let's go. So that's a very easy to understand problem. Now let's go in the other world. Okay, now we're in the DOT world. We created a platform where you don't need DOT actually to use these other blockchains, these other parachains. You can entirely run them on a third-party token, right? You do need DOT for the parachain team or the Web3 application team does need DOT to access the block space. So the only way to purchase Polkadot block space is through the DOT token. But practically speaking, once they've got that dot token, like I as an application developer have got this block space I need, I can then expose that block space to my users without involving dot at all. Now, this is, again, the anti number go up narrative, because wow, you allow these teams to access Polkadot, but they're not using the dot token. Some teams don't even, you don't even know in some cases that you're using Polkadot at all. You're just running on some Web3 application. It's just secure and fast and flexible. Like, wow, this is also not great for Polkadot, right? So these are two exactly opposite narratives, which, it's like, you can't have it both ways, right? So I think the belief we had when we launched Polkadot was that we want to create infrastructure. We want to create a platform where an application can access it and their users can access it without having to even know that they're even using dot at all, right? For example, right now you and me are on a video call. I have no idea if we're running this call on Amazon or AWS or Google servers or Microsoft servers or whatever, right? I just know that we're on a video call together. In many ways, that's the kind of perspective we want to have for these Web3 infrastructure. We don't really care where the application is being run as long as it's being run, right? But in the context of getting building up adoption, getting price go up or whatever kind of stuff, you can see how this same viewpoint may not actually be great in the short term. So what is Plaza? So Plaza, I think, is an idea of, well, Polkadot was really focused on just providing this secure block space and only building applications which were really necessary to provide this secure block space to other people. And that other applications like, DEXs and markets and NFTs, etc., will come with other parachain teams, right? And they'll basically run those applications on here. But I think, people feel at that point that dot token itself may not have enough utility, that dot token itself may not be providing enough functionality or features, and ultimately also that we as developers of the core protocol aren't pushing ourselves to run to the problems of building these kinds of apps that other teams we expect them to build, right? So it could be that our protocol isn't taking into account perspectives that we would have had if we wanted to design this in the first place, right? So Plaza is very much the idea of, okay, let's actually bring these kinds of basic needs, which we would expect to have in a blockchain ecosystem, as a core part of the Polkadot functionality. Maybe do it in a minimal way. Again, I don't think that we expect Plaza to be competitive with dedicated application developers, right? But still, it would provide enough base utility to allow and attract people to come and use dot at the core layer, to use the dot token, to realize that they are running an application like Plaza directly on dot itself, and not having a team basically hide the fact that they're using Polkadot to secure their network. So I think that's all the high level ideas, and I think that's also, it's a reasonable idea. It's a good idea. I think it also puts a little bit of forward pressure on these other parachain teams, right? A lot of parachain teams, their only feature is basically that they provide smart contract functionality, right? If all of their feature, if their only feature or utility is basically launching a palette, which is pre-written by us, and then having a token behind it, that's not a lot of exciting forward thinking. That's not a lot of exciting evolution or progress. So if they can't do better than us, just doing the same thing, then maybe they aren't a worthy competitor in the space. So I think also us providing a base level of utilities and functionality forces other teams, if they want to stand out, to provide and bring more to the table, right?
Right. I guess the name Plaza is to kind of symbolize, like, it's a buzzing place where people meet, and perhaps also a starting off point, because right now, I think one of the things is when you want to get USDT or something onto Polkadot, you can use Asset Hub, I believe. Like, it's a parachain focused on like the issuance of these assets, but there's not a whole lot you can do there other than that, right? And I don't believe it's seen much adoption. So with Plaza, like, what else will you be able to do there? What's the idea?
Yeah, I think that the high level idea is with Plaza, you'll be able to go to the Asset Hub and run general smart contracts as well, right? And with smart contracts, you basically unlock the door of being able to have users program the assets and monies existing on the Asset Hub, right? So once you have programmable money, I mean, that's just, the options are unlimited. Anything from DEXs to NFT ecosystems to airdrops to whatever you can imagine, that all can exist, right? So that's the kinds of things that we're looking to see and bootstrap in the space. And again, one of the key aspects here is, what is the Asset Hub? So I think the Asset Hub is not just any kind of parachain. It's what we call a system chain. And so we built in Polkadot this amazing parallelized technology to shard data, to shard execution, and to scale other blockchains. And we use the same technology to scale Polkadot too. Asset Hub is directly a logic of Polkadot being placed on its own shard, so that accessing that shard is much more simple and much cheaper and much easier to use, right? And so, again, unlike Ethereum, where if you want to move your tokens around, your cost of transaction is going to be dependent on how many other people are using applications on Ethereum. In this case, with the Asset Hub, independent of how many people are staking or how many people are using other parachains or whatever, the fees on the Asset Hub are only dependent on the transactions happening on the Asset Hub. We have basically sharded that data, right? That execution. And so in this context, running contracts or running a platform and be able to do things on Asset Hub is going to be very cheap compared to doing things on Polkadot itself or on other parachains. Because again, we're using the same technology to basically shard our execution, to basically scale our skills. So that's what we expect, and this is why this kind of a platform is actually going to work in the long term versus other teams. Building other layer 1 blockchains are basically pushing all of their execution onto their single core, their single layer 1, and we're seeing a lot of congestion, a lot of downtime because of that.
Okay. But on Asset Hub, for example, we're not hitting those limits yet. I mean, the capability is there, which is amazing from a technical standpoint. But I suppose, is the idea also to test or to kind of show a showcase of how much can be done on one shard or on one chain, so to say, on Plaza, on Polkadot? Because even though there are pains in terms of fees and stuff in other blockchain ecosystems, you're still seeing quite high adoption and liquidity there. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do think so. Ultimately, there are always going to be some upper limits to everything, but I think with Plaza and with the Asset Hub, what we can do is we can scale the Asset Hub as it gets more and more transactions, again, to use multiple cores, perhaps, right? And then we can take advantage of, again, this agile core time idea that we have in Polkadot as well, being able to really have these the Asset Hub scale for billions of users, right? But yeah, I think one of the important things to think about why, even though other chains don't have really scalable, block space systems, why they're still getting a lot of adoption is that ultimately a lot of these teams are subsidizing their blockchain and their usage to bring in adoption, right? So, for example, on some chains, you can mint millions of NFTs for just a cent, right?
Right.
One of the principles of Web3 is about Sybil resistance, right? So if it's possible to add millions of NFTs onto a system, and it only costs an end user 1 cent to do so, I'm just making up numbers too, right? I'm just kind of saying at a high level. Is this actually scalable? Like, what happens when people actually figure this out and people attack the network with $1 and make 100 million NFTs, right? Or more, right? Will their blockchain actually scale? How much will their nodes actually grow? How much will all this happen? So these blockchains, they're not thinking about long-term sustainability and scalability. They're thinking about short-term adoption curves. And this will really hurt them in the long term, because all the things that are happening right now, all these meme coins and NFT drops and bullshit that won't actually have any meaningful impact to the history of the chain, will forever live on the chain in the state, right? Imagine how many nodes, for hundreds of years, these chains will have, some random NFT drop back in, 2021 about some random, kitties or zombies or whatever. And this is going to hurt the scalability of that chain, right? So by us being able to parallelize and shard all the data, if you were to do millions and millions and millions of NFT drops into the Asset Hub, the impact on Polkadot is a single hash, is a single 32-byte hash. That it doesn't matter how much data is there, because we use the power of, again, things like Merkle trees to be able to consolidate all the information to a single fingerprint and be able to, again, shard that data so that those concerns are kind of off the main chain, so that Polkadot is always scalable and sustainable. Yeah.
All right, I'm bullish now. You got me.
Yeah. I have one more idea I'll throw in your way that we can use. This is in a forum post. It's an idea about disposable parachains. So let's talk about why Polkadot could be the best spot for doing things like airdrops, right? So again, going back to the normal idea, let's say that I have a normal layer 1 blockchain and I want to do an airdrop, right, on the chain. You do that directly on the state, right? So let's say that I want to transfer some NFT to 1 million users. it's going to create a million new items in the blockchain state, right? Each of these items, let's say, in the best case scenario, they're just a hash. They're like 32 bytes. That's still, a lot of kilobytes of data onto the chain. Not to mention that data is the base data. You also have a Merkle tree, which is storing lots and lots of nodes in that to represent all that data in the blockchain state. And then querying that data is also very complicated. Again, this is all base principles of the blockchain technology stack. And then, as we mentioned, this NFT drop is probably not actually important in the long-term, history of this chain. It'll be forgotten. It'll go to zero, and that will forever just waste space on the blockchain. And we're seeing this a lot already in things like Bitcoin and Ethereum. I don't know if you heard about this thing called dust accounts. Dust accounts are accounts on Bitcoin and Ethereum, which have such a little value in them that it costs more to transfer tokens from that account than the account is worth. So these accounts basically live forever in the blockchain state and make it more expensive to basically access anything else in the blockchain just because of these existing data. So all these chains doing all of this activity right now, which really has no meaningful impact, is basically, again, sacrificing short-term growth for long-term sustainability. Now, how can Polkadot improve on this? Well, Polkadot provides a method to shard data. We can basically have all of this data activity live on a separate chain, and on Polkadot, we have only store a Merkle root, a single 32-byte hash of the data, and then we use data availability to actually verify all the data. This again, we talked about this at the beginning of the podcast, a short-term storage where it's only needed for a small period of time and then it's forgotten. And this kind of short-term storage doesn't actually leave a long-term impact onto the scalability of a chain. So let's imagine the perfect airdrop scenario in Polkadot. I can build a service or an application on Polkadot, which is using, it's again sharded data. I could be running the service, using a small set of collators and still have the security and decentralization backed by Polkadot. And I can launch and release millions, if not billions, of NFTs and tokens and distribution to everyone. And I can do so at almost basically zero cost. I mean, if I want to subsidize this, with just buying some Blockspace is very cheap. I can make it so that all these transfers and transactions are free on my chain. I have the ability to control that functionality. And then, as people use those tokens, as the value of the token goes up, and as long as they want to keep those tokens around, they can move those tokens away from my airdrop chain and bring it to like more sustainable chains, like the Asset Hub. And the Asset Hub is guaranteed kind of to be around forever, right? Now, on the Asset Hub, your transaction fees may be higher. The cost to hold these tokens might be higher, but you'll have a guarantee that these tokens will actually survive for a long time. Whereas on this, airdrop chain, you can basically have zero transaction fees, but basically have no guarantee on the long-term sustainability of those tokens. But that's actually kind of great because as these tokens basically become useless, they can just disappear with this airdrop token, right? This airdrop chain. So let's say that
that's
you
disposable.
Yeah, exactly. It's disposable on it. So at some point where the chain has basically no value in it anymore, and there's all these BS tokens, we can just drop the chain from existing, and all this data just ceases to exist. And the only impact on the Polkadot is one 32-byte hash. It's one small fingerprint, right? And in that context, it becomes the best way to actually airdrop tokens, in the fact that we have full control over having users pay no fees, on how easy it is to access and create them, but also in terms of scaling and our layer one chain, right? That Polkadot is not actually affected by this activity. So we can actually encourage lots and lots of kind of degenerate activity on Polkadot without having any concern about the long-term sustainability of Polkadot itself. So I have a forum post on this on the Polkadot forum. But I think things like this are the kinds of things that we haven't tapped into yet, because it's more complicated. It's much more easy to be able to just launch a smart contract, just run something. But in terms of what actually will survive and what actually is the right way to do stuff, things like parallelization and things like disposable parachains, I think it will really be the right way to launch these kinds of tokens. And I think we'll start seeing that very much in the near future.
Right. We'll put the link to your blog post in the show notes. This is super interesting. I did not know about this, disposable parachains. Also, great tagline about the degen activity, decentralization. I like it. Right. So just to sum that up again for my own understanding. So basically you do that crazy airdrop billion transactions thing. But then this is like sort of like temporary storage. Then, but you can still make it permanent then by bridging that token or whatever, that allocation you received, for example, out to one of the system chain, like you said, for example, where there it will live forever. And then that
Exactly.
other thing, that disposable power chain, will disappear and not clutter or bloat the network.
Right. And the economics in game theory basically allows you to identify, what you think is valuable, right? So rather than having to treat every token as being, a valuable token, you can identify which ones are actually valuable to you, which ones you actually want to bring off the chain, and then, keep forever, right?
Right. Super interesting. I'd like to wrap this up with sort of, what are you excited about in the industry, in crypto right now? And perhaps also, what are you working on yourself? These two things would really interest me.
Sure. So the number one thing I'm excited about in the space is to actually start to see real Web3 applications. What I mean is that right now, blockchain and crypto is just DeFi. It is, and this is the thing. The fact that blockchain and cryptocurrency is interchangeable means we're too early in the space, because cryptocurrency is just one aspect of a blockchain system, is one aspect of a Web3 application, right? We haven't yet seen applications, the verticals of our space, like decentralized gaming, decentralized social networks, decentralized identity, decentralized prediction networks, these kind of stuff. We haven't seen these things actually take off, because in terms of everyone basically need to pay a lot of money to access this limited block space. The only kinds of apps that actually survive are the ones where basically you make more money than the transaction fees. This is basically like flash loans and trades and whatever, right? If it costs me $50 to update my identity, I'm never going to use a Web3 identity solution, right? It doesn't make sense, right? So finally, we're getting to the point where blockchains are scalable enough and flexible enough that it actually could make sense for people to build these kinds of other applications in Web3 on these blockchain platforms, and things like Polkadot, right? Like exactly, like this is what I'm hoping for. Polkadot is designed really to succeed in building these general applications, not just random degenerate DeFi, right? So that's what really makes me excited, because to be honest, as much as DeFi is cool in its own regard, it's basically proven. We know that it works. What we haven't seen work is all these other things which we want to experiment in, right? And it's only through scalable, flexible, modular block space like the one that Polkadot provides we can actually start to look into those things. So I'm excited to see those kinds of applications start to exist. And the other amazing thing about that is that if you go back to Peter Thiel, in his book 0 to 1, he describes the fact that you don't want to be a small fish in a big pond. You don't want to say that I own 1% of trading activity across all DeFi. You want to say that I own 90% of all activity in a smaller but important like decentralized identity space, right? You want to be a big fish in a small pond. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for Polkadot and for, again, the blockchain space to start capturing new markets outside of DeFi, outside of degenerate, basically gambling, right? So that's kind of exciting. And what I'm working on is very much that kind of stuff. So I'm doing a lot of education recently, obviously with the Polkadot Blockchain Academy, with conversations like the one we're having here, and you try to make it easier and more accessible for developers to be able to basically build these applications, understand the spaces they should be building in, and to remind users why we're here. Like, I think that what's most important than anything right now is just reminding people, what we're actually trying to build, to not get lost in the degenerate gambling and hype and the meme coins and shit coins, to actually remember that we are trying to solve real world problems that can actually change the way that communities and social and society interact, right? And I think that this is super relevant, super important. But in order to achieve that, we need to actually really be cognizant of the technology we're building, the decisions we're making, and the vision we have. So, a big part of what I want to try to do is, educate both technically, but also from a philosophical and direction, vision standpoint, stuff like that. Yeah, I also have some other. I have some other. Other projects I'm working on too, but I can't really talk about them right now. But you'll hear about them soon enough, I'm sure.
It's okay. No one's listening. You can tell us.
No, it's okay. I'll save the big releases when they get announced.
All right. Well, let us know when they're ready to be announced. Right, that was lovely. Perhaps quick shout out to Polkadot Blockchain Academy. We'll put the links to that as well, where you teach. And another thing, Polkadot Decoded, the big conference in Brussels. Will I see you there, by the way?
If you're there, I'm there. Yep.
Perfect.
Yes, I'll see you there.
And
then.
I
Yep,
think for people listening, if you have an ETH-CC ticket, I believe the Polkadot Decoded ticket is for free and right after, so that could be interesting.
Yeah.
Shawn, thank you so much.
Of course.
That was very educational for me. I'm happy to have you on anytime again. Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.